SEP Fanfic Readings presents Accidental Proposal by CJRed. Chapter 15. We are the Foxes. "Well, don't they look adorable?" was said sarcastically in a hushed but still rather loud whisper. Hermione blinked open her eyes and realized two things at once. She was in bed with Draco still, and someone was standing over them. "They do look adorable, but Drake is going to look singed if we don't break this up in about 30 seconds. Hermione groaned. That was Blaise. She would recognize Blaise in his sarcastic, teasing tone, even half asleep. She heard Draco groan and his arm tighten around her. "Shove off, you voyeur. Who let you behind our screen?" There was a snort, and Hermione realized that Ginny was there. "Madame Pomfrey is excellent at healing, but she really sucks at warding." Another snort and a dry drawl. "I'm not sure anyone could keep you out, Ginny. I hope you will show me that counter curse. It was very effective on the hospital door." Hermione pushed herself up and blinked at the three people standing over her bed, all with smirks. "What time is it?" she asked, moving her hand off Draco's chest and almost groaning at how good his chest felt under her hand. She felt him shiver, and then he was sitting up too, pulling her to her feet and placing her in her own bed before he sat back down on his. "There, her virtue is safe. Now, what the hell are you three doing here at 6:30 in the morning?" Blaise snorted. "Saving your arse, apparently. Theo is on his way with Mr. Weasley and his son, the prattish one." Hermione yawned. "Percy?" Ginny chuckled. "The very one. They've been working on the contract all night." Hermione nodded and then fell back on her bed. "They couldn't wait another hour?" she asked wearily. Draco snorted but looked over at her worried. "Are you hurting?" She shook her head. "No, just tired. Potion hangover, I think." Pansy made a rude noise and walked over, waving her wand. Hermione felt her hair braiding itself and cool air wash over her face. "Buck up, Princess. The press is well aware of your engagement now. They are demanding access to you and Drake. Madame Pomfrey rushed out to back up the headmistress that you should be left alone." Hermione heard Draco muttering what sounded like curse words and threw her hand over her eyes as Pansy waved her wand again and found herself dressed in beautiful sea-green silk pajamas. "Pansy!" Ginny chuckled. "We overheard them talking on our way here. The compromise seems to be that you will have to endure a 5-minute interview and a photo op." Hermione looked up, her face dark. "Not with Skeeter." Ginny laughed. "Who else would it be? Play nice. Dad's on his way to run defense with Mom." Hermione fell back against the pillows. "I don't want her seeing me in bed, even if I am in beautiful pajamas." Pansy sighed, while Ginny gave her a knowing smirk. "Can't be helped," Ginny said, her tone mild. "Mom and Madame Pomfrey are not letting you out of bed. Mom is the one who got them down to 5 minutes only." Hermione was about to say something when Theo stormed in. "Oi, get dressed," he said in irritation to Draco, who raised an eyebrow at the man, but took the stack of clothes from Blaise and left to do that. Hermione smiled at her brother, who looked tired but excited. "Good morning, Theo." He smiled back and leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Sorry, sis. It looks like the press will be here after breakfast." Hermione rolled her eyes and sat up. "So I heard. Will you be here for the interview?" Theo grunted and nodded. "I wouldn't abandon you to the wolves. Percy and I came up with a good cover story for the engagement." Ginny chuckled. "Percy and you? Why am I not surprised the two of you get along so well?" Pansy was chuckling as well, linked her arm through Ginny's. "Come on, Gin. Let's go eat so we can be back in time to see the show." Hermione watched her two friends abandon her and then laughed. "Thanks for the support," she yelled after them. Pansy waved while Ginny turned around and winked, and the two girls left at a run. Blaise shook his head looking after them. "Those two as friends absolutely terrifies me." "Pussy," Theo said, sitting down on his sister's bed. Blaise snorted and scratched his chest, mumbling, "No, smart. Well, I'm off to breakfast." Theo nodded at him. "Thanks for bringing them clothes, mate." Blaise smirked, winked at Hermione, and then left at a slower pace than the girls. Draco came out with his hair brushed and in his uniform, and sighed as he saw Theo. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" he asked, pulling up a chair and grabbing Hermione's hand. Theo watched him with a slight frown, but then sighed. We came up with a cover story about this engagement that doesn't make you sound like a drunk prat." Draco sat back, looking bored, while Hermione worked not to grin. "So, what is it?" Draco asked after a moment. Theo sighed and then said, "Basically what everyone will expect. It was contracted from birth. No one knows what was in my father's will. We are going to say that this was stipulated." Draco frowned. "That would mean that your father knew who she was, that he tried to kill her throughout the war. People could speculate that you knew too." Hermione shifted, feeling uncomfortable. "Theo," her brother sighed. "If it's brought up, I am going to tell them that I definitely did not know I had a sister. They will always believe what they wish anyway. I honestly don't care. I simply won't have your engagement story be passed around. It's indecent." Draco muttered. "Suddenly now you care about indecency." Theo glared and then shrugged. "Sister," was all he said, causing Hermione to roll her eyes at the man. "So the engagement was in the will. When did I find out about it?" Hermione asked, trying to move the conversation along. Theo ran a hand through his hair in agitation. "Same time you found out about me. You were upset, obviously, and then you got to know Draco and are now courting." Draco snorted but didn't say anything else, so Hermione asked, "And how do the Malfoys feel about this?" Theo went a little pink. "Well, they were surprised the missing Not daughter was still alive, horrified to learn who you really were, as you had been mistreated in their home, and are looking forward to getting to know you. However, if we could get away with not talking about them at all, that would be the best." Hermione went red and looked over at Draco, who was glaring at Theo. "She will not be getting to know my parents, and I am not repeating that nonsense if I can avoid it." Theo sighed. "I bloody well know that, but we can't just announce that you hate your family, Drake." Hermione squeezed Draco's hand, trying to calm him down and settle her own racing heart. He laced his fingers with hers and sighed, sitting back in his chair again. "How do we keep the contract private?" Hermione finally asked. Theo looked up and then grinned rather smugly. "That was easy. Mr. Weasley took care of it. He went to see the minister this morning first thing. It's sealed up tight. We actually didn't need to change anything. Pansy is pretty good at that stuff, and she argued on your behalf." Theo frowned a bit. "I wanted the courting clause changed, but she wouldn't stand for it." Hermione smirked and then nodded. "Good. I happen to like that clause." Draco shook his head, but flushed a bit as Theo mumbled something that sounded like it was unprecedented. Hermione played with her side braid as she considered all that Theo was saying. "So, basically this was a shock. We are getting to know each other, and please respect our privacy. We smile for a picture, and hopefully no one really cares that the Malfoy heir is marrying the not bastard." Theo looked at her angrily. "You are not a bastard. Our parents were married." Hermione grunted. "Fine. The lost not princess. You have to realize Skeeter is going to go out of her way to make this sensational." Draco frowned at her. "I always wanted to know why she had such a hard-on for you." Hermione grimaced. "I kept her in a jar 4th year when I caught her spying on us in the infirmary. She's a—" Both boys cut her off. "Unregistered animagus." Hermione sighed and then glared at them. "You knew?" Draco shrugged and Theo grinned at her. "Course we did. Brilliant you figured it out." Hermione shrugged and picked at her blanket. Theo was watching her wide-eyed, while Draco frowned at her. "You kept her in a jar. How did we not hear that story from your friends?" "Yes, well, I didn't spread that around. Only Ron and Harry knew about this. I was the reason she didn't work for the Prophet 5th year. It was part of the agreement we made. I promised not to tell the ministry, and she had to go into forced retirement for a year." Hermione nodded, looking fierce, and then she grabbed her wand and conjured a jar exactly like the one she had used before slamming it on the table by her bed. Theo looked at it, then burst into laughter while Draco shook his head, but with a smile said, "You are far more Slytherin than anyone else has ever given you credit for." Then he leaned forward, looking like he was about to kiss her, and Hermione lost the ability to breathe. "Hey, none of that," Theo said firmly. Draco froze and then sighed, sitting back while Hermione worked to not hex her brother. "I am marrying the man. You should probably get used to me kissing him," she said angrily. Draco smirked and moved his hand so that his thumb could caress her palm. "Back on subject," Theo said, his tone hard. "Mr. Weasley and Mrs. Weasley will be here for the start of the interview. They," and he flushed his tone, going a bit soft, causing Hermione to look at him curiously. "They, adopted me, I guess." Draco looked up at his friend. "Come again." Hermione, however, was beaming, and shot out of the bed to jump at her brother, hugging him. "Oh, that is wonderful!" Theo patted her, and then put her away from him. "Right, well, since they are your magical guardians, it made sense to add me to the list as well." Draco nodded, but still frowned. "You all right with that?" Hermione glared at him, but then paused. He didn't look upset. He looked, well, she wasn't sure. Maybe jealous? Theo nodded, his face going back to his typical mask. "I am. Hermione needs parents. The Weasleys know her well, and yeah, it's fine." Draco gave a slight grunt, and then looked over at Bop, who was still snoring slightly. "We should probably not have an elf passed out next to us when they show up." Hermione sighed, but waved her wand, moving the screen so that Bop was hidden. "Why am I in the hospital?" Hermione asked curiously. Theo winced. "They know about Ron going ballistic. We will play it off as a brotherly thing. He hadn't known about the engagement because he was so busy with training, and got upset not knowing all the details." Hermione closed her eyes. "I doubt she will buy that story," she said quietly. She felt Draco grab her hand again, and looked up to smile at him, knowing he could sense her unease. "It's better than the truth, Princess," Draco said softly, his tone slightly teasing. She made a face at his use of Princess nickname, and then turned to Theo. "Are we sure I have to be in the hospital for this? I feel fine. I just need some tea and breakfast and clothes." Theo sighed. "We kind of want to play you off as the fragile flower right now." At her look of outrage, Theo held up his hands. "Percy and I agree that the public rarely, if ever, sees you looking vulnerable. It will play well in the papers." Draco brought her hand to his lips, and her gaze swung to him. "He is right. Skeeter can't go on the attack with you in a hospital bed," Draco said firmly. Hermione sighed and glared at the wall of screens before she nodded. "Fine. One meek, weak, stupid girl cursed by Ronald coming up. But I still want breakfast and tea." Theo chuckled and stood up. "Come on, Drake. Let's go get that for her." Draco didn't stand, though. "Actually, I think I would rather stay here with Hermione. Send me up a tray too, will you?" Theo grunted, but left Hermione and turned to look at her fiancé. "I don't like being meek or weak in front of that woman," Hermione pouted. Draco grinned and pointed at the jar. "You have this sitting next to you." Hermione looked at the jar and then smiled a bit evilly. "True," she said quietly. "Very true." 2 breakfast trays arrived with the house elves a short time later, and Hermione and Draco ate in companionable silence. When they had eaten and were just sipping on tea, Madame Pomfrey bustled in looking harassed to check on Hermione and then Draco. Draco was declared fine to leave, but Hermione was to remain until after lunch for observation. "And if that woman upsets you too much, I will hex her myself," Madame Pomfrey said darkly as she went to check on Bop. Hermione moved the screen to watch, and was glad to see that Bop came around and looked fit after her sleepy night. The little elf actually was rather embarrassed, and after checking that her mistress was fine, she popped off, saying that she was late for her chores, and ignoring Hermione's plea to take it easy entirely. "She will be fine," Draco said reassuringly. Ron was still not awake, which Hermione was fine with. They kept the screens over him so that Skeeter wouldn't know that he was there, and Percy nodded at her as he went to go sit by his brother just in case. Slowly the room filled up with people. Theo was back with Mr. Weasley, and shortly after that, Ginny walked in with her mother, her face rather thunderous. "What's up?" Hermione asked curiously. Ginny just shook her head and mumbled, "Fight with Harry. Skeeter saw. I will tell you after." Hermione knew she looked worried, but she nodded at her friend and sat up as everyone took seats. Draco took her hand as they all waited for the reporter to show up with the headmistress. When she did, he squeezed her hand and she smiled at him. Ginny stood up and hugged her. "Well, I better be off to class. See ya," she said breezily with a wide smile before she skipped off. Mr. Weasley cleared his throat and then said, "Well, dear, I think you have assured yourself she is well. You can come back at lunch." Mrs. Weasley bustled around giving Hermione a hug, then Theo, and finally a shocked Draco before she allowed her husband to hurry her off. "You have 5 minutes, and don't you upset my children," Mrs. Weasley said in a menacing tone to Skeeter. Hermione hid her laugh, and she saw Theo duck his head, flushing. The headmistress nodded at Skeeter, her face full of resentment. 5 minutes, Rita. Rita Skeeter nodded, looking annoyed. Yes, so you all say. Then she turned to the three of them on the bed, her face gleeful. Well, what have we here? Do I call you Miss Granger, or Miss Knott? Hermione shifted and then said slowly, Hermione is fine. My last name is a bit confusing at the moment. Rita tisked. Yes, well, it's about to be Malfoy, is it not? Hermione knew she was flushing, and worked very hard not to glare at the obstinate woman. Not immediately, she said in a soft tone. Rita nodded. Yes. When is the happy day? Draco answered. The first Saturday after graduation, he said, his tone perfectly pleasant, but defiantly not friendly. Rita's quick quotes quill shivered as it wrote that down. Now tell me, what caused Ronald Weasley to charge in with wand drawn yesterday, Theo spoke up for the first time. We finalized the engagement contract and didn't realize he had not been informed. Hermione cut in. And he's been very busy training to be an Auror. Draco spoke up now. I guess you might say he wasn't amused to learn about it in the paper. Theo snorted. I would have been pretty steamed, too. It's a brother thing, he said in an aside to Rita. Rita looked at him, her face bored. Brother thing? I was under the impression that Ronald Weasley was her best friend and ex-lover. Hermione flinched. Best friend, yes, but honestly, Rita, how many times must I tell you that I am not, nor have I ever, dated Ron or Harry? We are family, all of us. That's incestuous. Draco snorted. I have gone to school with them for 6 years. I can assure you and your readers that they have never acted madly in love. Hermione sighed. That's not to say we don't care for each other. Theo added, The Weasleys are family. His tone was firm and uncompromising. Rita looked at all of them and then huffed. Draco, how do you feel about all this? Draco looked at her with a sneer. All of what? As any fiancé would know, it's a bit daunting that my girl has a Quidditch team full of brothers. Theo snorted out a laugh while Hermione grinned, and Draco shrugged. I am highly annoyed Hermione threw herself in front of an unknown curse. Theo sat up and glared at his sister, who rolled her eyes as Draco ended. But in the end, I get Hermione, so I am sure I can suffer through whatever obstacles her family and specifically her brothers throw my way. Hermione smiled at him and said cheekily, Ginny likes you. Draco inclined his head. There is that. Rita, clearly annoyed she wasn't getting the angle she wished, sneered at them. So, one big happy family, is it? Hermione narrowed her eyes at the woman, and Draco shifted, making sure there was a clear view to the jar. Why wouldn't there be? Hermione challenged back, although her tone was airy. This had to have come as a shock to you, Missy. Hermione nodded. It was a shock, but I got a brother, and she laughed. Another brother whom I adore. I ended up engaged to an amazing wizard, and mostly my life is unchanged. I certainly don't feel like a victim, and while my after-graduation plans may be a bit different, I am sure I will adjust. So you were telling me that the Golden Girl, Hermione Granger, is perfectly happy being forcibly engaged to a Death Eater, a Malfoy. They tortured you, did they not? Hermione's tone was glacier. No, they did not. Bellatrix Lestrange tortured me. Draco protected us by not identifying Harry, and Narcissa Malfoy is the reason the Dark Lord is dead. She lied to him about Harry still being alive, and if you call my fiancé a Death Eater again, I think that you will find that you and I have to settle an old score. Do not test me, Miss Skeeter. Rita went pale, and her eyes again flashed to the jar, before she mumbled an apology, and moved her questioning to Draco. How do your parents feel about this? They are not releasing a statement. Draco shrugged. I asked them not to feed into the hype. It's an engagement. What more is there to say? Hermione and I have agreed to marry. We are perfectly happy with the agreement, as are our friends and family. It was indeed a surprise to find ourselves engaged, but we rallied and are now committed to getting to know each other and finishing our last year of school in peace. Hermione spoke up. And we appreciate that people will have opinions, but we do respectfully request our privacy. It's been a wonderful year so far. We would love for that to continue. Rita's eyes narrowed. I understand you had a bit of a problem with other students this year. Hermione shrugged. Nothing I didn't expect. As I said, people have opinions. However, my true friends stand by me, and I am perfectly happy to have found out that Theo and I are related." "And what do the Weasleys think of this?" Rita said with a glint in her eye. "Any of them besides Ronald tossing curses Theo's way, Hermione laughed and then shook her head. "Of course not. Molly has adopted Theo just as she adopted me when I lost my parents." Theo flushed and then said solemnly, "I have been overwhelmed by their kindness and grace. They didn't have to welcome me, not after what my father has done." Hermione sighed. "Oh, Theo, none of that was your fault. They know that." Draco cleared his throat and said firmly, "The Weasley family has also been gracious and kind to me. The wizarding world needs more families like them around. Their capacity for love and forgiveness is humbling." Hermione looked over at Draco and had to blink away tears. What a perfectly lovely thing for him to say. She leaned up and kissed his cheek, ignoring Theo's soft growl. Rita looked between them all and then deflated. "Well, wonderful! Absolutely peachy!" "Your time is up, Rita," was said in a hard tone by the headmistress. "Get your picture and please leave." Hermione forced a smile as the silent wizard with the camera in his hands moved forward with a slight sneer. She was still in bed, propped up by pillows, and holding Draco's hand, with Theo standing looking down at her, his expression full of worry. She had to work very hard not to cringe at how ridiculous she felt, as Rita tried to organize more pictures. Headmistress McGonagall, however, was not having it, and Rita was hustled out by Hagrid, who had shown up to play bouncer. They could hear Rita screaming in annoyance that she hadn't gotten near enough pictures as she was let out. Hermione let out a long sigh and then looked at her brother. "She's lovely, isn't she?" Theo snorted and sank down in a chair wearily. "Glad that is over," he said, looking over at them. Draco shrugged. "She will be back to harass us again, I am sure." He stood up, though, his face carefully blank. "I need to send an owl to my mother. Will you be all right?" Hermione nodded and watched him walk away before she turned to her brother. "Had he told his parents yet about the engagement?" Theo was watching his friend walk away before he cleared his throat. No, he hadn't. Hermione sank back in shock and a little bit of misgiving. "Oh, well." Theo nodded. "Yeah." They were each lost to their own thoughts until the girl showed up and kicked Theo out. Ginny was bursting to tell Hermione about her fight with Harry, and Pansy wanted to tell her about their plans to go shopping the next day. Hermione sighed and looked up at them, trying to pay attention, but failing miserably. She was too busy being worried about Draco and wondering what he was writing to his mother.